We are back. It's the Joe Holger Show presented by PrizePicks. Week 15 tournament plays of the week, position by position. These are guys that might go overlooked in DraftKings GPPs, but can help us get to the top of the leaderboard. Let's jump in. There's a lot of really interesting tournament plays this week in general, just because I think that a lot of people are going to condense in this LA game because the Redskins, you just play everyone against the Redskins, but also we have one game that is significantly higher from a total perspective. We have the Cowboys and Bills game that I think people will gravitate towards, but who do you stack with those guys? We'll see. They're all expensive. There's a lot of things though, but a guy that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet this week is Jordan Love, 6,200. So let's talk through that.
Yeah, look, a $6,200 Jordan Love, a little bit more expensive than Matt Stafford, who I think is a phenomenal play in both tournaments, small field cash, you name it. Stafford's still great. But if we want to pivot and find a huge discount in ownership at the position, the Bucs ranked 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, and Ritter looked elite. He threw for like 350 yards against them last week. So they're a home favorite with a 23-point implied team total. And I think Love is going to continue to be sneaky, and what could really help elevate him, and so this will all be Saturday, Sunday type news, is the Watson and Reed potential injury status. I think Jaden Reed's going to be totally fine, but Watson dealing with a hamstring miss last week. So like if he comes back in, I think it drastically elevates Love to an even better spot, and that's when I would really look to get overweight on him.
I like it. This is like one of those ones too, where like if you're just like watching, you can see that like Desmond Ritter looking elite, like something's wrong here, right? So like right. I think this one's really solid like that. Do you want to touch on Stafford just quickly? I know that he's going to be a little bit chalky, but he's still like one of those guys that you can build around in a smart way, I think, and make some cool teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head there. If you play him, you have to build around him and around that stack in a relatively unique way. So look, he gets Washington dead last in AFPA to quarterbacks. Rams have the highest implied team total, sitting at 28.5. So, you know, I think he's a phenomenal play. He's been crushing it through the air recently. So that's why he's chalk though.
I like it. Let's move on to the running back position. 6,800 Benjon Robinson. I like this one a lot. We didn't touch on this one enough with Reeves, so curious your take on it.
Yeah, so what's nice here is I think ownership is going to be super heavy up top. Elliott, Kyron, CMC, all from like 30 to 40% owned. And then there's a pretty drastic cliff in drop off in ownership where you're going to see a running back like Tony Pollard, Rachaad White, Benjon Robinson, all kind of hovering between that 15 to like 18%. Mm-hmm. And Bijan's right there in the middle. So I think he's pretty reasonably priced, sitting at that 15% ownership. And he's seen 21.5 opportunities per game over the last 4 games. And he gets the Panthers defense that ranks 26 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. You know, I think the field has become sharp enough to recognize that regardless of him catching that touchdown that Ritter drastically missed him on, just a massive mistake, I think his ownership is probably the same. I think that theoretical touchdown is baked in to his ownership already, but that drastically changes his day from a fantasy point perspective too. So it's just a really great matchup. And then with that being said, I think you can play a $5,500 chalk Ezekiel Elliott at the running back position this week. KC ranks 20th in AFPA. There's def some concern around the New England implied team total, but I do believe his workload and potential goal. I mean, the goal line work is there. It's more just like he lacks TD equity in this matchup, but like 13 targets and 39 rush attempts over the last 2, that mitigates some of that implied team total for me for sure at $5,500.
Yeah, we talked about Zeke a decent amount in the newsletter last week, like going into that game, actually giving away an Ezekiel Elliott signed helmet over on Twitter. So make sure you guys are following me over there. We had a nice little ladder of Ezekiel Elliott rushing yards, receptions, fantasy points, ended up hitting the over on all of those in that Patriots game. which was really cool. Also, just like low key in the newsletter, had Juju Smith-Schuster over 18.5 receiving yards. That ended up being closer to like 35 by kickoff. So like just a ton of value by getting those picks earlier on the newsletter. The newsletter eats first. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight quickly is we're rolling out the PropDrop newsletter into multiple sports now as well. So basketball, baseball, hockey, we're going all in on props. So there's a link in the description for each of those individually. I know all of you guys aren't betting every sport, but didn't want to clog up your inbox with other sports. If you were interested in those individually, check them out. Going to be spending a lot of time on this as we progress through. Obviously, December is a huge week for the NBA, but then also as we I'll still get you guys some props and stuff going throughout the year, which will be a ton of fun. So make sure you guys check that out. Let's talk about wide receiver. So Cooper Kupp, right? Of like this entire game, you're going to have a ton of ownership on Nakua. You're going to have a ton of ownership on probably Robinson because he's so cheap. But Kupp, like at 7,800, like people don't want to click him for some reason. Why is that?
Yeah, Nakua, Robinson, and Stafford all seem to consume the ownership in this game. So I think going to Kupp, it's got to be a price thing, right? It has to be like, okay, Puka is a little bit cheaper, so I think going to Kupp is like, I think you can use the $600, right? It's 72 versus 78, so yeah, I think that's just really going to help keep his price suppressed. And to be real, like I think they should both be priced closer to 8,500. Washington ranks 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, and Kupp is coming in at like half the ownership of Puka, which I think makes him an excellent large field play. Puka is Stafford's first read a little bit more of the time. Puka has a larger air yard share, but it's still a $700-800 Cooper Kupp, who is still a target monster, seeing plenty of 7, 8, 9+ target games over the last stretch of 8 games.
I like it. That's one that definitely stands out to me, kind of in that like upper price range, Hodge, that I really like from a tournament perspective. And we talked about this kind of at length with Reeves in the matchups video, so check that out. But Mike Evans still really stands out to me, and he's looking basically unowned at this point. So I think if like people want to pay up a little bit at wide receiver for some of these Rams guys, or even want to get up to CeeDee Lamb at 9,200, you can pay down a little bit and kind of back your way into a nice like undervalued option with Evans. I think he's one of those guys still that's been undervalued most of the year for his upside. So like him from a tournament perspective this week. But let's talk about Garrett Wilson at 5,800, a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, so definitely going to be chalk this week, right? But the reasons are great price, phenomenal volume. Miami's 24th in AFPA to wide receivers, and that team total is sitting at 14 and a half, which I think the Pats might have had a slightly lower implied team total last week, but other than that, this is like the lowest team total I've seen in a long time. So it's all about price. It's all about making the rest of the roster work. So this is basically me saying I'm totally fine playing Garrett Wilson in large field, even at 20-30%, wherever he ends up getting steamed up by the end of the week.
Okay. Right on. Yeah, I think that like in that range, like we're going to see a lot of ownership there. But we mentioned Jaden Reed probably on every video this week. And then I think now that Rashee Rice is kind of a full-time player, people will feel a little bit more comfortable with him at 6,100. So, and then, yeah, we still have Wandale for super cheap. Like there's a lot of chalk at wide receiver this week. So I don't think you have to necessarily avoid all of these guys. You just have to build around them in a smart way. So, tight end still feels like a pay down week to me. But let's talk about Okonkwo first at 3,100.
Yeah, so I think most of the field is also going to think that it's going to be a pay down type of a week. I could see Trey McBride approaching that 25-30% ownership clip, which I think Chig still probably gets to the 15 to 20% by the end of the week. But over the last 4 weeks, he's been Will Levis's first read 15% of the time, which is second highest on the team behind D-Hop, who just commands like a massive first read percentage. Chig's also running a route on 60% of his team's offensive snaps. And then the matchup here, Houston ranks 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So at $2,900, like that is way too cheap. Like if Chig was 38, I bet you his ownership is cut in half, right? But at 2,900, the field's just like, okay, yeah, duh, give it to me. I'll take it. So That's really what's pushing his price point up, which probably means it's a good fade in tournaments because of how often that position fails. So I really think Davis Allen at 3,300 is the sharp move at tight end, and it's one of the ways that you can get exposure to Stafford is through Kupp and Allen and keep your product ownership down, even though Stafford's going to be chalk. So look, I've already talked a ton about the Rams. Allen makes for the great stacking partner. He ran a route 60% of the time versus the Ravens last week. He's a pretty low ADOT player, and I definitely think I prefer Chig to the price point, but in large field tournaments, playing Allen with Kupp and Stafford is just like such an easy lock for me.
Awesome. Well, PrizePicks is going to give you $100 if you use code Holka to lock in this bet we're about to talk about. We got two guys. We got Joe Mixon under 56.5 rushing yards. Also Ezekiel Elliott over 52.5 rush yards. You want to talk through those ones quickly?
Yeah, I wanted to give the people a little Saturday sweat equity here.
Nice.
So I was taking a look at the Saturday slate and really do like, this isn't just like DGen sweat only bet. I actually think this is a sharp bet. So we've got the lower on 56.5 for Joe Mixon, and the Vikings have been excellent at stopping the run, ranking second in AFPA to running backs. The last time and the only time they allowed a running back to eclipse this number was back in September. It happened to be like DeAndre Swift doing like 150 yards on the ground. So not only did he eclipse it, but he just absolutely smashed. But in that span of games, that includes holding CMC to 45 yards on 15 rush attempts back in October. So it's not like they've just faced a ton of weak competition. So I also think they held Isaiah Pacheco under this number. So like there was some decent running backs in there for sure. So really like this. And I'm also just like a mix and fader in general. So it lined up for me, and I haven't projected, or we haven't projected for way less than that.
Yeah, I think if he gets there too, it's probably going to be through the air. These like little dump offs get into space. That's kind of where this offense is going versus like the Joe Burrow downfield offense. So I think that the rushing yards under would be my lean here as well. So right there with you.
Yeah. Okay. And then for the Sunday, look, on workload alone, Elliott should hit the higher on 52.5 rush yards. But as I mentioned, the Chiefs are not very good at stopping the run. In fact, a running back has hit the higher here in 7 straight games, and there were some pretty dusty names. Not that Elliott isn't a dusty name, but I think he might have some fresh legs. We've seen him be pretty hot the last 2 weeks.
Yep, I like that one. That plays right into one of my way too early props that I took this week. I took the under on 295.5 passing yards for Dak Prescott. That has already moved down to about 284, so already about 10 yards of value just by getting this early through the newsletter. Just kind of an interesting one just because Dak has missed this mark in 3 of his last 4. The Bills also have only allowed one quarterback to exceed 300 yards in their last 5 matchups, and that was Jalen Hurts in an overtime game. So still really like kind of the unders for Dak, which would play right into some of the overs that we have in some of these other games. I like to mix and match some of these, right? So obviously if you get Zeke in one of these other games in a good spot, like I'm trying to find other ones that I think are just like out of whack from a projection standpoint early in the week. They don't have to be in the same game necessarily. So let's building a DraftKings team though. Patriots defense at 2,300 on your list here, Hodge. So let's start there.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward. Pats are generating pressure a decent amount of the time, 10th highest in the league at a 37% clip. Meanwhile, Mahomes and the Chiefs have been under pressure 12th most time in the league at a 36% clip. So I think this is a more than fine punt with KC on the road, Pats playing at home, 2.3K. Sign me. Like when I can actually find a good reason to punt at defense and not just click the cheapest one, I'm like, all right, this feels good. Let's do it.
On. Okay, perfect. Well, I think we should build a Jordan Love team, man, because I think that's going to be super unique this week. You have any thoughts on how we can build around that?
Yeah, we can definitely do a Jordan Love team here. So $6,200 Jordan Love. Look, I think we lock in the running backs that we talked about, Benjon and Elliott.
Like it.
And then pairing up Love, I'm actually fine. Like I think Reed is definitely going to carry some chalk, but I think playing Jaden Reed is fine. Okay. It's very easy to click Romeo Doubs though, if for any reason you want to double, you can go Reed and Watson. I think that's fine. Remember, Love can get it done on the ground with his legs. So in large field, I'd be a little bit more inclined to just like skinny stack this and not do a full onslaught.
Okay.
So playing Dobbs or Reed is great for me.
Okay, cool. So we got two wide receivers, a flex, and a tight end, $6K to work with. So still a decent amount of salary if you wanted to prioritize one of these other guys. We could probably still get Kupp on this team. There's a few things we could do.
Yeah, I definitely think we play Kupp. And then I think with Garrett Wilson, we plug him in, and the chalk that we have at Elliott, Benjon, and Garrett Wilson chalk, we probably can't really play Chig here, and we definitely need to be playing. Maybe we just play Davis Allen.
Yeah, I kind of like that, because that'd be like a unique way to back into some exposure in that game. I think just getting Kupp and Allen versus like all the other chalks. I think that's really sharp actually. And then leads us right into 7,100 in the flex. So can't quite get to Mike Evans as a bring back at 7,500, but we got Chris Olave, who I think is interesting, even though he had DNP on Wednesday. I know Reeves likes Olave a lot this week. Rashad White. There's a bunch of different ways we could go with this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think the correlation with Rashad White, if he really gets there in the passing game, this game is up in pace. He's been phenomenal in regards to usage. I think Rashad White is a smash on DraftKings at 7K. Do you have a good feel on his ownership in general? Are we getting I think he's going to be right around that Pollard Bijan. So I think our product is going to be fine here with Love. The only thing that I would maybe consider doing is finding a way of playing Romeo Dobbs instead of Reed in a lineup like this. Like, this is a pretty chalky lineup in general. So I would probably find a way to get to Dobbs over Jaden Reed, but I still like this lineup.
Yeah, I like it too. I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the running back tier. There's just like a massive drop off after you get past Zeke, Kyren, and McCaffrey. So I think Rashad White, even if he ends up being like 10 to 15% on this build, still totally fine. I think there's enough unique like combinations on this roster to where it still might grade out pretty well, even though there's some chalk on it. So I'm on board with this.